Courtney Brentwood Carter didn't look at her husband when she said it. She looked at her manicure, turned her wrist slowly under the courtroom lights, examined her nails like she was sitting in a salon chair, then smiled at her attorney, the kind of smile that belongs to a woman who has never once been told no. "I gave that man everything," she said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I opened every door for him. And let's be honest." She finally glanced at Elijah, one slow sweep from head to toe. "A black man from Southeast D.C. doesn't walk into those rooms on his own. I put him there." Her attorney didn't stop her, so she kept going. "Without my family's name behind him, he'd still be drawing blueprints nobody ever looked at." She tilted her head. "I civilized his career. I made him presentable. That deserves to be compensated." Then she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and added the last part almost as an afterthought, quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "He should be thanking me, not sitting there looking like I owe him something." The court reporter's fingers froze above the keys. Elijah Carter did not move, did not blink, did not give her a single thing she was looking for. But nobody in that courtroom, not Courtney, not her attorney, not one person in that gallery had any idea who had just pulled into the parking garage one floor below. Nobody knew yet, but they were about to find out. Don't you dare click away from this one. Stay with it, every second counts. Drop your city and local time in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching from. And if this channel is new to you, hit subscribe. What happens next is exactly why this story exists. The alarm on Elijah Carter's phone went off at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in early March. He had been awake for 20 minutes already. He reached over and silenced it before the second buzz. He sat on the edge of the bed in his townhouse on Quincy Street in Alexandria, Virginia, and held still for a long moment. Not because he was afraid he had already asked himself that question at 3 in the morning, and the answer had been no. What he felt was something quieter and older than fear. The particular weight that settles on a man who has spent years being asked to perform calm in rooms designed to produce anything but. He stood, showered. His gray suit was already pressed and hanging on the closet door. He had done that the night before, along with everything else. Briefcase-packed documents organized in order, coffee set on a timer. He stood at the bathroom mirror and worked the knot of his tie with the kind of focus most people reserve for serious problems. Measured, deliberate, unhurried. He had spent a long time building that unhurried quality. He had learned to treat it as a form of armor. Elijah Carter was 43 years old. Associate Professor of Architecture at Howard University. The youngest person in that department's history to receive tenure. He had completed his undergraduate degree at Howard and gone on to the Yale School of Architecture, returned to his alma mater at 34, and spent the years since building a body of work that earned him the American Institute of Architects National Honor Award, the youngest recipient in the Mid-Atlantic region, and the first black architect in that category to receive it before the age of 40. His book, Foundations, The Invisible Architecture of Black America, published 4 years earlier, now appeared on required reading lists at more than 200 universities across the country. It had not made him famous. It had made him respected. Elijah had always understood the difference between those two things clearly. He had always preferred the second one. The townhouse was modest relative to his standing. Clean, ordered, unshowy. A drafting table near the east-facing window where he still worked in pencil before moving to software, because he believed that every building worth building should begin as a human gesture before it became a digital file. The walls were mostly bare, except for 2 things. In the hallway, a framed blueprint mounted behind glass. The original hand-drawn floor plans for a community center in Richmond, Virginia, completed in 1961, by a man named Earl James Carter, Elijah's grandfather, the first licensed black architect in the state of Virginia. He had died when Elijah was 11. That blueprint was the only piece of inheritance that had no dollar value attached to it, and that no court proceeding in any state could ever touch. On the table beside the kitchen, a photograph from 29 years ago, a federal courtroom in Richmond on a winter afternoon. A tall man in judicial robes standing at a podium, right hand raised left, resting on a Bible with a worn spine. Beside him in a suit, slightly too large for his frame, with a tie, he had knotted himself that morning, stood a 14-year-old Elijah Carter, watching his father take the oath of office for the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Judge Harold Carter, 32 years on the federal bench, twice considered for elevation to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Passed over both times for reasons the nominating committees never stated plainly, and that Harold Carter had never not once in 3 decades discussed publicly with any journalist colleague or law clerk. He had carried it the way he carried most things, in complete silence and without bending. He had called the evening before to say he had a scheduling conflict. A motion hearing set months ago that couldn't be moved. He was sorry he couldn't make it. Elijah told him it was fine. He meant it the way a man means something when he has long since learned to stand in hard rooms without backup. He poured coffee into a travel mug, locked the front door, and drove the 11 minutes to Arlington County Family Court. He kept the radio off. He always preferred silence before rooms like this. His sister Simone was already in the gallery when he arrived at 7:45. She was a pediatric nurse at MedStar Georgetown and had taken a personal day to be there. She sat in the 3rd row with her arms folded and her jaw set in the particular way it set when she was holding something back. She had been holding something back for nearly 2 years. Since the evening Elijah sat across from her at her kitchen table with a glass of water he didn't drink, and told her clearly, and without embellishment, what the marriage had actually been. She had believed him without asking a single follow-up question. He had never told her how much that meant to him. Elijah took his seat at the defense table. Marcus Webb was already there. Mid-40s wire-rimmed glasses, a stillness in his courtroom manner that tended to unsettle opposing counsel because there was no way to measure in the opening minutes exactly how much he already had. He had worked this case for 9 months and had said very little about what he found, except once, at the end of a long late-night preparation session, when he set his pen down and said quietly, "Let her talk, Elijah. Whatever happens in there, just let her talk." Elijah looked at the empty seat in the front row of the gallery, his father's seat. He held his eyes on it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked away and faced forward. The bailiff called the room to order at 9 o'clock. Judge Renee Holland entered through the side door, mid-50s natural haircut close, the measured gaze of a woman who had presided over enough family court proceedings to identify a rehearsed performance within the first 5 minutes. She sat, opened her file, and the hearing began. Elijah placed his hands flat on the table in front of him, breathing even, face still. He looked like a man who had been preparing for exactly this room for a very long time. He had been. What he didn't know yet was that 40 minutes away, his father's motion hearing had just ended early. 6 years before that Tuesday morning, Elijah Carter walked into a fundraising gala at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., and made what would become one of the most consequential decisions of the following decade. He had not intended to stay long. The event was professional obligation, 1 drink a circuit of handshaking, then home to the drafting table. He was mid-conversation with a Howard colleague when Courtney Brentwood appeared at his shoulder with 2 glasses of champagne and the specific kind of smile that belongs to someone who has already decided what they want before the conversation has a chance to begin. She was sharp, poised, the effortless ease of a woman raised in rooms exactly like this one, who had never once questioned whether she belonged in them. She asked about his work, and asked the right questions, specific, curious, not performative. She laughed at the right moments and listened at the right moments, and by the end of the evening she had his phone number and had used it before he reached his car. He noticed that. He told himself it was charming. He should have paid closer attention to what it actually told him. The first year was good. He told Simone that, honestly, when she asked. Courtney attended his lectures, read 2 of his research papers without being asked, showed up to a student gallery opening at Howard, and stayed for 2 hours. At their wedding in Middleburg, Virginia, on a clear September afternoon, he noticed a particular tightness in her father William Brentwood's jaw during the vow's 6 seconds, maybe 7. He told himself it was emotion. He was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. The first visible crack appeared 8 months in at a dinner party in Georgetown. Elijah was mid-sentence explaining a structural innovation for an affordable housing project in Prince George's County when Courtney reached over, touched his arm lightly, and said, "What Elijah means to say is," and finished his sentence with a version that was shorter, softer, and had stripped out everything he had actually meant. The table smiled at her. She smiled back. Elijah picked up his glass and said nothing. He told himself it was an accident. It happened again 3 weeks later. Then again at a conference reception. Each time with the same light touch. Each time with the same polished redirect. As though his thoughts required translation before they were suitable for the room. She began calling his network at Howard, his colleagues, his mentors, his former students. Those people from your old world, always in the car on the way home from events, always in the tone of someone stating a neutral geographic fact. At Thanksgiving, at her parents' home in Greenwich, Connecticut, William Brentwood gave a toast at the head of the table. He looked at Elijah once during it, not unkindly, but with the very specific expression of a man performing generosity while experiencing something else entirely. Elijah noticed. He said nothing. He helped clear the dishes. The night Elijah received the AIA National Honor Award at a ceremony in Chicago, attended by 500 people, covered by 2 trade publications, he sat across from Courtney at dinner afterward, at a restaurant she had chosen. She was looking at her phone when he arrived at the table. She looked up, smiled once, and said, "Now, maybe my parents will finally stop asking questions about us." He waited for the rest of the sentence. She went back to her phone. He looked at his reflection in the window beside their table and stayed quiet. When he began seeing a therapist, a black therapist in Northwest D.C., who worked with high-achieving professionals, Courtney heard about it and described the decision to her sister on the phone as another black thing. He heard it from the hallway. She didn't know he was home yet. He stood there for a moment, then walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and did not say anything that evening, or the next. Over 2 years, she worked on his relationship with Simone. Never directly. Always in the register of practical observation. She makes you seem less polished at these events. She doesn't understand the world we're building. You always seem different for days after she visits. Elijah started calling his sister less. When he finally noticed how much less, it felt like discovering a room in his own house he had somehow stopped being able to find. He filed for divorce on a Wednesday afternoon in October 18 months ago. He called Marcus Webb first, then Simone. He did not contact Courtney directly. Webb had specifically advised against it. She retained Dana Graves within 48 hours. Graves had a precise reputation in Northern Virginia family court for aggressive narrative construction before the formal process began, for seeding the right words into the right conversations before a single motion was filed. Within 3 weeks, Elijah's name was appearing in conversations among mutual acquaintances with the word volatile attached to it quietly and consistently like a label pressed on and left to adhere. The formal counterclaims arrived shortly after. Emotional abuse, volatile behavior, psychological intimidation, full alimony, half the architecture firm he had founded 8 years before meeting her, a share of the book royalties, equity in the Quincy Street townhouse purchased entirely with Earl James Carter's inheritance money before Courtney Brentwood had ever known Elijah existed. He read every page in Webb's office without speaking, set the stack down, looked at the wall. "She's describing someone I have never been," he said. Webb looked at him over his glasses. "I know," he said. "That's why we're going to let her keep talking." Over the 9 months that followed, Marcus Webb built a case file with the quiet precision of a man who understood that the best architecture, structural or legal, is the kind that looks simple from the outside and is nearly impossible to dismantle from within. He collected. He documented. He cross-referenced. He said very little to Elijah about what he was finding, except to confirm at the end of each meeting that it was developing exactly as he expected. Elijah did not press for details. He went to work. He taught his classes. He called Simone on Sundays and tried to rebuild in weekly conversations what 2 years of distance had worn away. He was still building when the hearing date arrived. Dana Graves was the kind of attorney who understood that a courtroom is a theater before it is a courthouse. She dressed for it, dark blazer-structured silhouette, the quiet authority of someone who had performed this particular act many times and knew precisely which moments to let breathe and which ones to fill. She rose from her chair, buttoned her jacket once, turned to face Judge Renee Holland at the bench, and began, "Your Honor." Her voice was measured and warm, the kind of warm that is entirely deliberate. "My client, Courtney Brentwood Carter, came to this marriage in good faith. She came with resources. She came with social capital. She came with a family name and a network that opened doors for Mr. Carter that would not otherwise have been available to him." She let that sentence complete its circuit through the room before continuing. She gave 6 years of her life to this partnership, and what she received in return was not partnership. What she received was volatility, unpredictability, a home environment in which she never knew from 1 week to the next when the atmosphere would shift. She said the word volatile 3 times before her opening statement ended. She said unpredictable twice. She said she never knew when he would snap, once slowly, with a deliberate half-second of silence after the word snap, enough space for the word to travel across the room and land somewhere in the back of every mind present. She never said the word black. She didn't need to. The suggestion moved through the room on its own current, the portrait of a large, silent, unknowable man seated across the aisle who needed to be pre-described as dangerous before a single piece of evidence had been entered. Elijah Carter was aware of this. He had been aware of this specific maneuver since he was a teenager being stopped on the street in a neighborhood that was technically his. It was not new. It was simply louder now, and it was going on the permanent record. He sat with his hands flat on the defense table, and his face entirely still. Courtney Brentwood Carter took the witness stand at 9:32. She was composed. A dove-gray blazer, small pearl earrings, the picture of measured, dignified grief. She spoke in full sentences, made eye contact with the judge at appropriate intervals, and delivered her testimony with the practiced fluency of someone who had spent considerable time in rehearsal. "I gave up my own professional ambitions to support Elijah's career," she said. "I used my family's connections to create opportunities that weren't accessible to him before we were together. I managed our household so he could focus entirely on his work. I did that willingly." She paused, looked down briefly at her hands, then looked back up at the bench. "I did it because I believed in the partnership. I believed in him." Dana Graves stepped forward with a soft, rehearsed question. "And in terms of the emotional environment in the home, how would you characterize that day today?" Courtney exhaled slowly. "Tense. Always tense. I learned early in the marriage to read the room before I said anything to gauge what kind of evening it was going to be before I walked through the door." She shook her head in a small, practiced gesture of sadness. "His community." She paused, appeared to catch herself, corrected the landing. "And the world he came from didn't always understand the pressure I was under to make this work, to hold two very different worlds together." The phrase, "his community," had appeared and disappeared in under 3 seconds. But it had appeared. In the third row of the gallery, Simone Carter's jaw tightened until the muscle along it was visible. She sat perfectly upright and looked at the back of Courtney's head with the expression of a woman who has heard every version of a particular lie and knows precisely how far it has been bent from the shape of the truth. 3 rows behind Simone, a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, nodded slowly along her expression, warm with sympathy. She had heard volatile, and she never knew when he would snap. And she had glanced at Elijah Carter once and formed her picture of the situation without waiting for documentation. That was the design. That was exactly the design. Elijah did not react. He did not write anything on the legal pad in front of him. He did not lean over to Webb. He sat with his hands flat on the table, face composed, breathing even. In another context, in a lecture hall at a conference podium, this would have been described simply as professional self-possession. Here, because of what Graves had seeded into the room before the first witness was sworn, his very stillness was being read by certain people present as coldness, as detachment, as precisely the dangerous unknowability they had been primed to see. Elijah was aware of this. He had been aware of this dynamic his entire adult life. He let the awareness move through him and settle, and he stayed still anyway, because stillness was the truth, and the truth was the only thing he had brought into that room. Graves concluded her direct examination at 10:47. She saved her final question for effect, the kind of question designed not to gather information, but to leave a lasting image in the room. "Is there anything else you'd like Judge Holland to understand about what your life was like during this marriage?" Courtney looked directly at the bench. Her voice dropped. "I just want someone to finally see how hard I tried." A brief pause. "I gave everything I had to make it work." She let her gaze drift once deliberately carefully toward the defense table. "And I received nothing back." The room held that sentence. Then Marcus Webb uncapped his pen, set it at the top of a clean legal pad, and stood. "Ms. Brentwood Carter," he said. His voice was entirely level, unhurried, the voice of a man who has been waiting a long time to begin. "I'd like to start with the house." Marcus Webb did not raise his voice. He never did. He placed a manila folder on the edge of the judge's bench, slid a copy to Dana Graves, and set one in front of Courtney Brentwood Carter with the quiet deliberateness of a man laying the foundation of a structure he had already finished designing months ago. "Ms. Brentwood Carter," he said, "you testified that you used your family's connections and resources to support your husband's career. I would like to examine that claim carefully. Let's begin with the most significant asset in this proceeding, the property on Quincy Street in Alexandria, Virginia. Can you tell the court whose name appears on the original deed?" Courtney shifted slightly in her seat. "It's in Elijah's name." "And the purchase price? I'm not certain of the exact $340,000. Webb placed a document on the stand in front of her. Exhibit B, the original deed of sale. The property was purchased 11 years ago, 3 years before you and Mr. Carter met, using a personal inheritance of $180,000 from the estate of Earl James Carter, supplemented by a mortgage held solely in Mr. Carter's name. Ms. Brentwood Carter, did you contribute any funds toward this purchase? A pause. I wasn't in his life at that point. That's correct. You weren't. He let the room absorb that for a moment. Now, during the marriage, mortgage payments of $4,200 were made monthly on this property. Exhibit C shows the complete payment history over 72 months. Can you identify who made each of those payments? Courtney looked at the document. Elijah handled most of the finances. He made every single payment from his personal income account. There is no record of a single mortgage contribution from any account held in your name or from any transfer on your behalf. Webb set the page down cleanly. The home you are seeking equity in was purchased before this marriage began and maintained entirely by Mr. Carter throughout it. He opened the next folder without changing his pace. Let's discuss the architecture firm. Carter Design Associates was incorporated 8 years before your marriage with startup capital drawn from Mr. Carter's personal savings and a small business loan in his name alone. Exhibit D is the original incorporation filing. Every client relationship in the firm's documented history was established through Mr. Carter's professional portfolio and direct referral from his academic and design network. Webb looked at her steadily. Ms. Brentwood Carter, can you name a single client of Carter Design Associates that came to the firm through your family's connections? Courtney opened her mouth, then closed it. Take your time, Webb said. The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. In the gallery, the woman who had been nodding sympathetically through Courtney's earlier testimony had stopped nodding entirely. She sat with her reading glasses still pushed up on her forehead, looking at the witness stand with a different expression than before. I introduced him to people at events, Courtney said finally. That kind of social exposure has professional value. Networking is real work. It may be, Webb said. I'd like to enter Exhibit E. He distributed a new set of documents. These are emails exchanged between your father, William Brentwood III, and 3 professional contacts in the D.C. architecture and real estate community between 2020 and 2022. In each of these emails, your father describes Mr. Carter, as I am reading directly, not quite the right fit for our family's professional circles. And in a separate message, a situation Courtney will eventually course-correct. 2 of the 3 recipients subsequently declined to respond to meeting requests from Carter Design Associates that had been initiated through your introductions. Webb placed the final page face up on the stand. Ms. Brentwood Carter, you testified that you opened doors for your husband. These documents suggest your family was in at least 3 documented instances actively working to close them. Dana Graves rose. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is characterizing, I am reading from authenticated documents entered into evidence, Webb said without turning around. Judge Holland looked at Graves. Overruled. Continue. Webb turned back to Courtney. Let's discuss income. Over the 72 months of your marriage, Mr. Carter's salary firm revenue and royalties totaled approximately $940,000. Your personal income over the same period from 14 months of employment totaled approximately $62,000. Mr. Carter contributed 94% of all household income. He set a single summary sheet on the stand, 2 columns of numbers, the disparity clear and cold. The mortgage, both vehicle payments, utilities, insurance, and the events at which you made your social introductions, all of it funded by Mr. Carter. Your 6% contribution came from 14 months out of 72. Courtney's composure had begun showing strain around its edges. The precise, practiced quality from earlier that morning was developing visible fracture lines. "I was present," she said. Her voice had changed register slightly faster, slightly higher. "I was emotionally present. I managed the home. I created the environment that made his work possible. That kind of contribution doesn't show up in a bank statement. I agree that emotional presence in a marriage has value," Webb said. He closed one folder. Then he opened another. Slower this time. Deliberate. With the unhurried care of someone who has been waiting a long time for this particular moment. "Which is exactly why I'd like to discuss what you said about this marriage when you believed no one was documenting it." Courtney's hands moved to her lap. She pressed them together. "I am entering Exhibit H, Your Honor, a series of text messages." The courtroom settled into a particular kind of silence. Not the silence of inattention, the silence of a room that has collectively sensed something arriving and has decided without discussion to stop moving. Marcus Webb pulled a printed sheet from the folder. He held it for a moment before reading from it the way a surgeon pauses before the first incision, not from hesitation, but from precision, making sure the room was ready before he began. These are text messages sent by Ms. Brentwood Carter to her close friend Rachel Morrow over a period of 3 years during the marriage. They have been retrieved, authenticated, time-stamped, and certified. I will read selected excerpts into the record. He looked to the bench. Judge Holland gave a single nod. Webb looked at the page. November 8th, 2021. Courtney Brentwood Carter to Rachel Morrow. "He's genuinely brilliant, I'll give him that. But God, sometimes I just want to remind him where he actually came from. Like that part is still real, no matter what the resume says." The court reporter's fingers slowed for 1/2 second, then continued. March 3rd, 2022. Same conversation thread. Webb's voice did not change register. "My parents were right about this. You can dress it up. You can put it in a beautiful suit and give it a Yale degree and a fancy national award. But you cannot change what it is. You just can't." The room went still. Not quiet, still. The quality of the air shifted the way air shifts before weather arrives. The man in the second row of the gallery, who had been leaning back with his arms folded, slowly uncrossed them and sat forward. October 17th, 2022. Webb set the paper down slightly and picked it up again. "I am carrying this entire marriage. Everything he has, I helped build. He would be absolutely nothing without the world I opened for him. Nothing." Dana Graves was on her feet. "Your Honor, these messages are being presented without context." "Ms. Graves." Judge Holland's voice was level. "These documents were entered into evidence through proper authentication channels. You will have full opportunity to address context on redirect. Please be seated." Graves sat. She did not look at Courtney. Webb set the first sheet down and lifted a second document. Exhibit 1, Your Honor. An audio voicemail left by Ms. Brentwood Carter for her sister on April 29th, 2023, approximately 6 months before she filed for divorce. He held up a small device. "With the court's permission." "Play it," Judge Holland said. The speakers crackled once. Then Courtney's voice filled the room, casual, unguarded, the voice of someone who believed completely that she was in a private moment that would remain private. "Honestly, I just want out at this point. I want what's mine before he actually figures out that I was never really on his side. Like, I need to move on this fast, Rach, before he gets smart about it." The recording ended. Nobody in the courtroom moved. Simone Carter had both hands pressed flat on her thighs in the third row. Her eyes were fixed on the floor directly in front of her, and the effort of staying in her seat was visible in the set of every muscle she had. Elijah did not move. His hands remained flat on the table. His face had not changed. But something behind his eyes had shifted not to anger, not to pain, to something quieter than both. The specific expression of a man who has known for a long time what the truth is, and is now simply hearing it said out loud in a room large enough to contain it. Webb walked back to the witness stand at an unhurried pace. He placed both printed sheets in front of Courtney and looked at her with the calm directness of someone who has no antagonism in this only questions. Ms. Brentwood Carter, you testified this morning that you gave everything you had to this marriage, that you believed in your husband and in the partnership you were building together. He tapped the documents lightly. Do these messages reflect the beliefs of a woman who was invested in her husband's success? Courtney's composure was no longer intact. What had been polished and practiced 2 hours ago had been replaced by something rawer, less managed, working visibly beneath the surface. Those are out of context, she said. What context makes "you cannot change what it is" an appropriate description of your husband? I was frustrated. Marriages have difficult seasons. What context makes "I was never really on his side" consistent with your testimony that you were a committed and supportive partner? That was a private conversation. I was venting to a friend. In private, Webb agreed. When you had no reason to perform for an audience. When there was nothing at stake except saying what you actually believed. He looked at her directly. Ms. Brentwood Carter, which version of your feelings should this court believe, the one you prepared for this room, or the one you expressed when you were certain nobody was watching? Courtney's breath came faster now. The composure Dana Graves had spent months constructing was collapsing in real time, and Graves, watching from the respondents' table, had gone entirely still, the stillness of an attorney who has calculated that any intervention will only accelerate the damage. You don't understand, Courtney said. Her voice had climbed into a different register entirely. You don't understand what it was like being the only person doing the invisible work, the real work, while the whole world stood up and applauded him, while he received award after award, and nobody once asked me what I gave up, what I sacrificed. Her voice cracked. I built him. I built what he became. And now he wants to stand here like he did it completely alone. The phrase "I built him" dropped into the room the way a stone drops into still water, and every person present felt the rings of it move outward. Elijah's hands did not shift. His face did not change. He breathed in once, slowly and evenly, through his nose. In the third row, Simone rose halfway out of her seat before she caught herself and sat back down. Her hands were trembling. The woman with the reading glasses in the back row had her palm pressed over her mouth. Judge Holland set her pen down and looked at Courtney Brentwood Carter for a long, deliberate moment. We'll take a 15-minute recess. The 15-minute recess stretched closer to 20. People in the gallery stood stretched, moved in quiet clusters toward the water fountain and came back. The court sketch artist turned her page and started a new one. The bailiff stood near the front wall with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the room with the professional neutrality of a man paid to see everything and react to nothing before he needed to. In the hallway, Dana Graves had Courtney against the wall near the far window and was speaking close and rapidly into her ear. Courtney stood with her arms folded, staring past Graves's shoulder at the middle distance. Whatever Graves was saying, it was not landing the way Graves intended. Court reconvened at 11:40. Graves rose before Judge Holland had fully settled. Your Honor, at this time the respondent would like to call William Brentwood III to the stand. Something shifted into the gallery at the name. Small, but perceptible. Courtney's father rose from the second row, tall, silver-templed, wearing a dark suit pressed with the care of someone who had handed the task to someone else that morning. He adjusted his cufflinks before he reached the aisle. He walked to the witness stand with the unhurried ease of a man who had never. in 6 decades of living, been required to explain himself to a room he hadn't chosen. He sat, smoothed his jacket, offered the bench a warm, practiced smile, the smile of a man who understood that even here, presentation was a form of argument. Graves approached gently. "Mr. Brentwood, how would you characterize your observations of this marriage over the past 6 years?" Brentwood clasped his hands in his lap. "I'll be direct," he said. "I had reservations from the beginning. I want to be clear, I have nothing against Elijah as an individual. I'm certain he has considerable talents. But the match itself." He tilted his head with the air of a man offering reluctant but necessary wisdom. "My daughter was raised in a particular world, particular values, particular standards, a particular way of conducting oneself. Elijah came from a very different place, a very different background. I worried from the outset whether a gap that wide could ever genuinely be bridged." "And in your observation, did those concerns prove founded?" "They did." "I watched Courtney exhaust herself, trying to hold 2 incompatible worlds together. She carried that marriage. She deserves to be properly and fairly compensated for what those years cost her." Marcus Webb rose for cross-examination with the same measured, unhurried quality he had carried all morning. "Mr. Brentwood," he said, "you used the phrase, 'very different background' in your testimony. When you say that, are you referring specifically to a racial difference?" Brentwood stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "I mean cultural, the way a person is raised, their environment." "Can you be more specific? Social fluency, values, the ease with which one moves through certain environments and professional circles." Webb nodded. He opened a folder. "I'm entering Exhibit J, Your Honor. 3 emails sent from Mr. Brentwood's personal address to professional contacts in the D.C. real estate and architecture community between 2020 and 2022. He placed the documents in front of Brentwood. In the 3rd email, dated September 14, 2021, you write, and I will read this precisely. "Courtney's husband is not quite our kind. I trust you'll keep that in mind with respect to any professional referrals." Webb looked up from the page. "Mr. Brentwood, when you write, 'not quite our kind,' what do you mean?" The gallery had gone completely quiet, the kind of quiet that has measurable weight. Brentwood's jaw moved once before he spoke. "That was a private correspondence. It is now authenticated evidence in a federal court proceeding. What did you mean by 'not quite our kind'?" "I meant—" He stopped, began again. "I meant that he came from different professional networks, different social backgrounds, a different racial background. I have already told you I am speaking culturally. Your daughter's text message reads, 'You can't change what it is no matter what the resume says.' Your email reads, 'not quite our kind.'" Webb let both sit in the air for 1 full second. "Mr. Brentwood, is there a pattern here this court should understand? The patrician control, the pressed suit, the practiced warmth, the unhurried ease of a man accustomed to deference shattered." Brentwood's face colored. He leaned forward in the witness box, and the thing that came out of him had the particular velocity of something that had been held back for years and finally found an opening. "That boy," the word came out reflexive, immediate, with the fluency of private habit, "should be grateful he ever had access to our family, to our name, to what we represent. Grateful. Do you understand what Courtney gave up? What we all gave up? What we did for him?" The word "boy" had entered the room, and every person present felt exactly what it was. Nobody moved. Judge Holland's pen stopped. She looked at William Brentwood with an expression that had passed entirely beyond warmth or professional neutrality into something absolute and cold. "Mr. Brentwood." Her voice was flat and precise. "You will stop speaking immediately." Brentwood blinked. His face was still dark with color. His hands gripped the armrests. At the defense table, Elijah Carter's pen touched the legal pad exactly once, a single small mark, and then he set it down. His face was still. His breathing was controlled. Only Simone in the third row, who had known her brother for 43 years, could see the precise quality of stillness that meant he was holding something enormous and choosing with full deliberateness not to let it show. The bailiff had moved 2 steps closer without being instructed to. In the gallery, a young black man in a summer suit stood quietly and walked toward the doors without looking back. He had heard enough. He didn't need to stay for the rest. Graves was already on her feet. "No further questions, Your Honor." Court broke for recess. In the hallway, Elijah reached into his jacket pocket and checked his phone out of habit. One new message from his father. 5 words. "On my way. 5 minutes." Elijah read it twice. He stood still in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. Then he put the phone back in his pocket, straightened the front of his jacket with one hand, and walked back toward the courtroom doors without saying a word to anyone. Court reconvened at 12:30. The gallery filed back in with the quiet, slightly altered atmosphere of people who had spent a recess processing what they had just witnessed. Chairs scraped against tile. Whispers faded. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Holland entered through the side door, opened her notes, and scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of a woman who notices everything and files it accordingly. "Before we proceed," she said, "I want the record to reflect that the court has taken formal note of the language used by the previous witness. That language will be addressed in my ruling." She looked at Graves without expression. "Ms. Graves, you may call your next witness." Graves stood. She had spent the recess recalibrating. Her posture was controlled, her voice steady, but the slight deliberateness of every movement was visible to anyone paying close attention. "Your Honor, the respondent has no further witnesses. We rest." Holland looked at Marcus Webb. "Mr. Webb, anything further from the petitioner? A brief closing summary, Your Honor." "Proceed." And then the doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically. They pushed inward the way doors open when the person on the other side is not in any hurry and has never needed to be, with a quiet, steady, entirely unhurried wait that had nothing to do with force and everything to do with presence. Judge Harold Carter stepped through. He was 69 years old, 6 feet tall, silver-haired with close-cut gray at both temples. He wore a charcoal suit. No tie pin, no display, nothing decorative, with a pocket square, the deep blue of a Howard University flag folded with geometric precision. He carried nothing. He did not look around the room to orient himself. He simply entered and walked forward, and every step carried the unhurried rhythm of a man who had walked into rooms of consequence for 32 years and had never once required a room's permission. The bailiff saw him first. The man's posture changed before his mind had consciously processed what his eyes were telling him. Shoulders back, chin level, a small involuntary nod of recognition. The kind of nod that cannot be taught. A response to authority the body produces before the mind votes on it. 3 attorneys seated in the gallery recognized him within seconds. One leaned toward the person beside her and spoke in a voice barely above breath. A second simply exhaled. A woman in the 5th row touched her husband's arm without looking at him. 2 law students from American University who had come to observe proceedings for a class seminar looked at each other, then back at the aisle. Nobody needed to announce who he was. The room responded to Harold Carter the way rooms respond to certain kinds of authority, not with performance, but with instinct. Everyone sat a fraction straighter. Everyone quieted a fraction further. The quality of attention in the room shifted before the reason for it was fully understood by everyone present. At the respondents' table, Dana Graves caught movement in her peripheral vision and glanced toward the gallery. Her hand found the edge of the table. "Who is that?" Courtney asked quietly. Graves did not answer immediately. She was running the calculation. Her face had moved from controlled to pale inside 2 seconds, and pale was already giving way to something that did not have a professional name. "Courtney." Her voice was low and very precise. "That is Judge Harold Carter, United States District Court, Eastern District of Virginia. He has been on the federal bench for 32 years. Courtney looked at the silver-haired man walking down the center aisle. "So, he's a district judge. We're in family court. He was on the short list for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals." But Graves paused for exactly 1 second, 3 times. The word 3 arrived on Courtney's chest like a change in pressure. She looked from the aisle to the front of the room, then back again. Then she looked at Elijah, who had not turned, had not reacted, whose posture at the defense table had not changed by a measurable degree. He had known, or he had allowed himself to hope. Either way, he had said nothing. Harold Carter reached the front row of the gallery without slowing. The empty seat there had the particular quality of a space that had been held. He turned, sat down, and smoothed the front of his jacket once with one hand. Then he did one thing and one thing only. He looked at his son. It was not a grand gesture. No wave, no expression of triumph, no signal to the room about who he was or what this moment meant. It was simply a father looking at his son across a difficult room on a difficult day, with the full, unhurried, unshakable weight of someone who has always been watching and has never once stopped. Elijah turned once. Their eyes met. Harold gave him the smallest nod, the kind that does not travel across a room so much as arrive in it. "I'm here. I see you. I always have." Elijah turned back toward the bench. His shoulders dropped exactly 1/2 inch. Not in defeat, in arrival. The specific, quiet release of a man who has been carrying something entirely alone and has just felt, for the first time all morning, that he is no longer carrying it that way. Judge Holland had looked up from her notes. Her pen had stopped. She recognized Harold Carter. She had appeared before him twice in her own career before her appointment to the bench. She held his gaze for one composed, professional fraction of a second, gave a small nod of acknowledgement, and returned to her notes. At the respondents' table, Courtney Brentwood Carter was no longer looking at Harold Carter. She was looking at her own hands folded on the table in front of her. Her jaw was set. Something had shifted in her face, not fear exactly. The particular expression of a person who has just understood fully, and too late, that the room has moved irrevocably in a direction they cannot follow. Marcus Webb approached the center of the courtroom. Judge Holland set down her pen, looked at him, and spoke. "Mr. Webb, I don't believe we need a closing summary. This court has reviewed all testimony and evidence in full. I am prepared to rule." Judge Holland did not reach for her gavel. She did not perform preamble. She opened the ruling she had been composing throughout the morning's proceedings, looked at it for 3 seconds, and looked up. "This court has reviewed all testimony, financial documentation, authenticated communications, and the full conduct of all parties during today's proceedings." Her voice was precise, carrying clearly through every corner of the room. "I am delivering my ruling on all matters presently before this court." She looked at the respondents' table, not with hostility, with the settled, absolute authority of a judge who has heard everything she needed to hear. "Ms. Brentwood Carter's petition for alimony is denied. The court finds no credible evidence that Mr. Carter's career was materially advanced through the respondent's family connections. The evidence demonstrates the opposite, that Mr. Carter built his professional standing through his own work over a period predating this marriage by nearly a decade, and that certain members of the respondent's family actively worked to undermine professional opportunities extended to him. The alimony petition is denied in full. Courtney's hands pressed together on the table in front of her. The respondent's claim to equitable distribution of Carter Design Associates is denied. The firm was incorporated, capitalized, and fully operational before this marriage began. No contribution by the respondent to the firm's growth has been substantiated by the evidence. The firm remains Mr. Carter's sole property. Graves had stopped writing. Her pen rested unused across her legal pad. The respondent's claim to royalties from Mr. Carter's published works is denied. These works represent Mr. Carter's independent intellectual labor. The respondent has demonstrated no material contribution to their creation, development, or publication. Holland turned a page. With respect to the property on Quincy Street, Alexandria, the property was purchased by Mr. Carter using personal inheritance funds 3 years prior to this marriage. No financial contribution by the respondent to its acquisition or ongoing maintenance has been demonstrated. The property remains Mr. Carter's sole asset. She removed her reading glasses, set them on the bench, and looked out at the room with the expression of a woman who has seen a great deal over a long career and has decided that this moment calls for something beyond procedural neutrality. This court must additionally address the conduct of these proceedings directly and for the record. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The language used in this courtroom today by a witness under oath was not an emotional slip, not an isolated poor choice of words under pressure. The court record reflects a pattern. Text messages characterizing the petitioner as something that cannot be changed regardless of his accomplishments. Emails describing him as not quite our kind. And a word spoken from this witness stand that the transcript will preserve in full and that this court formally designates as racially contemptuous. She paused. This court has observed and documented sustained racial contempt directed at the petitioner throughout this marriage and within these proceedings. That documentation is now part of the permanent public record of this case, and it will remain so. The gavel came down once, clean and final. In the front row of the gallery, Judge Harold Carter did not move. He sat with his hands resting in his lap and watched justice complete the work the evidence had made possible. He looked like a man who had been patient for a very long time and had learned through 32 years of presiding over rooms exactly like this one that patience applied with precision is its own form of power. The courtroom began to empty. The sketch artist was filling her second page. The bailiff held the side door open with the expression of a man who would describe this day accurately and at considerable length for years. Elijah Rose gathered his documents and walked into the hallway. Simone fell into step beside him. Marcus Webb followed 3 paces back. The 3 of them moved in the grounded, unhurried way of people who have come through something difficult and are still adjusting to the fact that it is finally over. Quick footsteps behind them. Elijah. Courtney's voice was sharp, slightly breathless. She had followed him into the hall, Graves a few paces behind with her briefcase closed. You planned this. You knew he was coming. This entire proceeding was staged from the beginning. Elijah stopped. He turned around slowly. He looked at Courtney Brentwood Carter the way a man looks at something he has examined very carefully for a very long time and has finally set down for good. My father came to watch, he said, quietly, evenly. He didn't say a single word the entire time he was in that room. He held her gaze for 2 seconds. The truth did all the work. He turned and walked away. Simone looked at Courtney for exactly 1 second, a look that contained years of restrained things, then turned and followed her brother. In the parking garage, 40 minutes later, Dana Graves set her briefcase on the hood of her car and looked at William Brentwood, who stood beside her in his pressed suit with his jacket folded over one arm, squinting against the afternoon light. "I won't be filing an appeal on this record," she said. "I would strongly advise against seeking one through any other counsel." She got in her car, started the engine, and drove out of the garage without looking back. William Brentwood stood beside the concrete pillar where her car had been. Courtney stood 5 feet away, not looking at him. Between them was the particular silence of two people who have run out of things to blame other than each other and have not yet begun that conversation. By the time Courtney reached home that evening, her phone showed 31 missed calls. None of them were from people who wanted to offer support, not one. The court transcript became public record at 4:17 that Tuesday afternoon. A clerk in the Arlington County Records Office processed the documentation with the routine efficiency of someone filing a standard proceeding. She had been in the building that morning. She had stood in the back of the gallery for 11 minutes before her lunch break. She called a colleague in the records department before she left for the evening. That colleague mentioned it to a friend who covered Northern Virginia legal proceedings for a regional news outlet. By 9 o'clock that night, Caleb Morrison had the full transcript on his desk. He read it once. Then he read it again. He made 4 verification calls, 2 for background and 1 to his editor. Then he wrote. He filed at 5:20 the following morning. The headline read, "Federal Judge's Son Cleared as Wife's Racial Contempt Exposed in Arlington Divorce Hearing." The article was thorough, sourced entirely from the public record, and required no embellishment. Morrison was a careful journalist who understood that certain stories are diminished by dramatization. He reported what happened exactly as it happened in the order it happened, and let the facts do what facts do when they are presented clearly and completely. By noon, the story had been shared 47,000 times. By evening, it was on every platform, in every feed read, in every time zone. The phrase "I built him" had been pulled from the transcript and was moving across the internet with the specific velocity of a sentence that crystallizes something people already suspected was real, but had never seen stated with such unself-conscious clarity. Legal commentators appeared on morning programs. One civil rights attorney speaking from her D.C. office told a national audience, "What those text messages describe is not marital frustration. It is a documented pattern of racial condescension inside a marriage. The court recognized it, named it, and put it on the permanent record. That matters." The word "boy" used by William Brentwood under oath was replayed on 2 national cable broadcasts. It played once, then again. The repetition was not sensationalism. It was evidence, and audiences understood it as such. The board of Brentwood Capital Investments convened on Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, the company released a 4-sentence statement confirming that William Brentwood III had stepped down as chairman effective immediately to pursue other interests. No one who read the statement needed clarification about the reason. Courtney Brentwood Carter was removed from a commercial real estate partnership deal she had spent 18 months building. The firm cited reputational concerns in a letter to her attorney. She relocated from Northern Virginia within the month. Her name remained attached permanently to the transcript to the article, to the phrase she had spoken from the witness stand. She had wanted the world to see what she believed she had built. In the end, the world saw exactly that, and understood exactly what it meant. Dana Graves quietly withdrew from 2 similar cases in the weeks that followed. A former client, a black man who had faced comparable coded characterization in proceedings she had managed 3 years earlier, filed a formal complaint with the Virginia State Bar. The complaint was accepted for review. Marcus Webb received 11 referrals in the 90 days following the ruling. He built a practice specializing in family law cases involving documented racial bias in marital proceedings. He gave one interview to a legal journal in which he said, "The record in this case is a textbook. Not because it was unusual, because this time it was documented." Elijah Carter returned to Howard University. He taught his classes. He held office hours with the same open-door policy he had always maintained, the same willingness to sit with a struggling student for as long as the problem required. He answered every email within 48 hours. He kept the drafting table near the east-facing window. He kept drawing in pencil before moving to software, because he had always believed that a building should begin as a human gesture. The work was the same. He was the same. The only thing that had changed was that a public record now existed confirming what he had always known about himself, and what someone else had spent 6 years trying to convince him was not true. His second book, Built Anyway, was published the following spring. It became a bestseller in 3 categories. It was dedicated to Earl James Carter, 1931 to 1989, and to Harold Carter, still serving. Howard University named a design studio in the architecture department in his grandfather's honor. Elijah attended the naming ceremony with Simone on one side and his father on the other. Simone established a legal advocacy fund for Black men facing racially coded characterization in family court proceedings. She named it after their grandfather. In its first year, it provided funding for representation in 7 cases across Northern Virginia and Maryland. By the second year, it had received donations from people in 41 states. At a private family dinner, 8 months after the ruling, Harold Carter set his fork down and looked at his son across the table. "I didn't go to that courtroom as a judge," he said. "I went as your father." Elijah looked at him. "You didn't say a single word the whole time you were in that room." Harold picked his fork back up. The small, quiet smile of a man who has spent 32 years understanding precisely how much silence can accomplish in a room where the truth is already present. "That's the point, son," he said. "That has always been the point." Elijah held that for a long moment. Then he smiled the first full, unguarded smile anyone in this story had seen from him in a very long time. The kind of smile that belongs to a man who has come back to himself after a long absence and found that everything worth keeping was still there, exactly where he had left it. Some things, it turns out, cannot be managed away, talked away, or taken. They simply wait, patient and unmoved, for the room to go quiet enough to hear them. Someone will always try to reduce you to where you came from, to use your origin as a ceiling. Let them talk. Your grandfather's blueprint on the wall, your father's quiet presence in a room, your own work built before anyone tried to claim it. These things are yours. They were always yours. No courtroom, no contempt. No person's small idea of you can touch what you actually built. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if this is the kind of storytelling that means something to you, subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming, and every single one of them matters.